Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again. I am back once again. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And today, ladies and gentlemen, is a special day. It's November 17th. For many, it is a day of excitement as we look back on the day. And for many, it began as a tragedy. Now, for those that are unaware, the Snyderverse began back in 2013 with Man of Steel. Man of Steel still is technically the highest grossing Superman movie of all time. It starred Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Lawrence Fishburne, Russell Crowe, Harry Lennox, and many others. um, Henry Cavill's Superman and the movie itself received a mixed response. However, there were a lot of people that ended up liking the movie, and there were a lot of people that also ended up, taking to his Superman. And And so naturally, Warner Brothers greenlighted more. And we didn't know at the time, but director Zack Snyder had a plan for not just Superman, but the Justice League as well. Man of Steel led to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, which came out in 2016. Now, before we even knew that Batman was going to be in the sequel to Man of Steel, and before we even knew that uh, Batman v Superman was even going to be the sequel. Unfortunately, the movie got delayed, and Marvel also mysteriously changed the title of their initial Captain America Winter Soldier sequel to Civil War once they saw Batman v Superman was going to be the Man of Steel sequel. Then after Batman v Superman came out, it also saw mixed reviews, although it had a much better fan response. And when the Ultimate Edition of the movie, which included 30 minutes of the movie, released on home media, it received a far better response. And a lot of people were wondering, even with the R rating, why that edition didn't release in theaters. Then in 2016 as well, we saw Suicide Squad, directed by David Ayer. And for those unaware, it tied in initially in David Ayer's original script, which I'll talk about much later. It tied into the plans for um, the overall DC universe. However, the final product, the theatrical cut, ended up unfortunately being riddled with comedy and pop jokes and pop music. But somehow that movie was still a whopping success. And at the time, there was a movie slate for DC. There was a movie slate that DC originally had planned. It had the likes of not just Justice League Part 1, but also Justice League Part 2. And most of what we saw from the DC movie universe was not what was originally planned with the original slate. We were set to get a Cyborg movie. We did end up getting a Shazam movie, and it met its original release date. Um, but we were set to get a Green Lantern Corps movie, Justice League Part 1 and Part 2. And we have to assume that the Ben Affleck's Batman movie was also set to be on that slate as well. And unfortunately, we all know what happened there, for better or worse. So a lot of what we saw from the DC movies in the aftermath of BVS wasn't originally on the slate, aside from Save You Shazam and Aquaman and The Flash, which kept getting delayed. Now, we can go back and forth on the reception to Batman v Superman and Man of Steel. We can go back and forth on if you think Henry Cavill was a good Superman or not. Most people liked Henry Cavill as Superman and still do to this day. A lot of people aren't even aware that they're making a new Superman movie. A lot of people aren't even aware that DC is starting things over. But for better or for worse, we won something thanks to November 17th, 2019. But I'm not here to talk about that just yet. You see, originally Justice League was going to be part one and part two. There was a 5 film movie plan as explained to us by storyboard artist and legend Jay Oliva that would have eventually seen Superman become the classic Superman that we all wanted to see. And I find it funny that people, even to this day, that people still call Henry Cavill Superman too dark or too depressing or too lonely, this, that, and the third. Because in spite of everything he had to face between Man of Steel, BVS, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, he was still Superman in the midst of it all, in my opinion. So when people say things like, oh, he's too dark, he's too depressing, it often confuses and baffles me. But Jay Oliva and many others have talked about the original Justice League plans. Zack Snyder himself even had a different storyboard for the original Justice League that changed initially. We would have seen the Lanterns, we would have seen more of Martian Manhunter, we would have seen other characters show up in future Justice League movies. Now, initially, Justice League Part 1 was set to be a totally different movie. Justice League Part 2 would have came out in 2019. And there would have been a Part 3, which again would have been set entirely in the nightmares Earth that we saw in Bruce Wayne's dream sequences in Batman v Superman, and that we saw at the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And essentially, we would have seen something similar to the history lesson that we saw in Zack Snyder's Justice League, although everybody, literally everybody, would have united against Darkseid. So For whatever reason, Warner Brothers decided, well, we're just gonna release Zack Snyder's Justice League and move on. But as I said, the story that started with Superman would have ended with the Superman that we all know. And initially, the Snyder Cut, how it started, it came roughly after the Justice League released in 2017. And initially, it was all just a rumor. Initially, people weren't on board with a Snyder Cut or different version of Justice League. People were under the impression that the movie that we saw in theaters was Zack Snyder completely through and through. Even with the tragedy that befall his family back in 2017, people still thought that the movie was his that released in theaters. And thankfully, with some valiant efforts from members of the Snyder Cut community, that I won't mention their name, and other sources revealing that the OG cut of Justice League is completely different, it started to catch fire, it started to catch steam. Had we been disheartened, had we remained unfaithful and disloyal, Zack Snyder's Justice League would never have released. And of course, one must not forget that the American Suicide Foundation Prevention is also a thing. And thankfully, many members of the Snyder Cut community contributed to that as well. But even beyond that, that being a very important thing, November 17, 2019 occurred, and over a million tweets from many, many different people came about, not just regular people, but celebrities as well. And fortunately, the Snyder Cut was revealed in 2020 and it was released in 2021. And I want to go back to ASFP. I think it's a very important thing. Um, a lot of people, have, myself included, have contributed to it. Some people like to give publicly, some people like to give privately. It gives you the option to do either or. And I think even to this day, it's an important thing. Um, you know, rest in peace to Autumn Snyder. I just think that if you're a fan of Zack Snyder, you should definitely do research on ASFP. And beyond that, it's a great thing that Zack Snyder was able to release his movie, not just for the fans, but for his daughter as well. Now, shortly after Zack Snyder revealed that in 2020 that the Snyder Cut was coming in 2021, David Ayer, the director of Suicide Squad, revealed that he has a different version of Suicide Squad. Essentially, he revealed that his cut of Suicide Squad is much different than what we saw in theaters. And pretty soon, he started campaigning for his cut to be released as well. And he started revealing more of what happened in his cut of Suicide Squad. And it's interesting because even now we haven't heard much about from WB or Chairman James Gunn about what's coming with David Ayer's Suicide Squad cut, original cut of Suicide Squad, unfortunately. And I think if you respect directors, a lot of people have said, "Oh, I don't need to see this cut released," or "Why are people campaigning for this?" I think the same with Zach, the same with other directors that have director's cuts. If you're a supporter of artistic integrity, if you're a supporter of filmmakers having their original vision released, then why wouldn't you support it? Why wouldn't you support David Ayer's cut of Suicide Squad releasing? And not only that, he said that the movie is essentially finished, and he's leaked a few images from the cut of Suicide Squad that is his, and he's shown pages of the script that confirmed that his cut and the cut that we saw in theaters are totally different things. So the Snyderverse is not dead. Definitely want to see David Ayer's cut of Suicide Squad, and I think that people that supported Zack should definitely support David Ayer for his quest for justice for his Suicide Squad. But yeah, man, it was hashtag release the Snyder Cut is how it started. After shortly after Justice League released in 2017, um, and then the hashtag became Restore the Snyderverse shortly after the hashtag release the Snyder Cut became hashtag Zack Snyder's Justice League. It became hashtag Restore the Snyderverse. And unsurprisingly, people still want to see Zack finish what he started. There have been many, many discussions about, you know, how Zack could come back and finish his DC movies, his DC story, because the story itself was not finished. Zack Snyder's Justice League did release in 2021. We won that, and thankfully we were able to see it. But the story itself was not finished. A lot of people were saying it's too expensive, suggesting that they do it in animated form or comic form. And yeah, um, um, James Gunn was brought in to oversee the DCU, and his DCU will start this December with Creature Commandos. Funny story about that. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't remember what I was doing that day when I found when I this is when I found out the news. I found out the news from a second party. Essentially, James Gunn came and said, no, James Gunn was announced. Um, a friend of mine called me and he was like, "Yo, dude, what you lied? What is going on?" And I'm like, "What's up?" And he said, "Why is this man that made the movie about the talking tree and the talking raccoon making DC movies now?" I'm like, "What you mean? He just made one movie." Because at that time he had done the Suicide Squad and I guess Peacemaker. He's like, "This man is gonna be making DC movies now." I'm like, "What you mean he making another movie?" He's like, "No, he's in charge of making DC movies." And so I'm like, "No, that can't be right. That can't be right." And so I hung up the phone. I did a little research and come to find out James Gunn is, the news dropped and everything, and James Gunn is in charge of making DC movies. So, man, when I tell you I just was in disbelief, I know a lot of people were praising, you know, jumping up and down off their couches. They were like, "Oh man, this is so exciting! James Gunn is now making DC movies." Ha ha ha. So that's another video for another day. I'll talk about it at some point because one of my viewers wanted me to talk about how I feel about James Gunn and the DCU. I'll talk about it at some point, but just not today. But yeah, man, back to the Snyder cut. A lot of people in Hollywood, aka the higher ups, were mad that the Snyder cut even came out, or that Zack Snyder's Justice League even came out. A lot of people behind the scenes were mad, and a lot of people to this day are still pointing the finger at Zack Snyder. I feel like the finger should be pointed at Toby Emmerich, Geoff Johns, and Walter Hamada, and even Kevin Tsujihara for mandating that the original Justice League movie be under 2 hours, because that was a sign of trouble then and there. And them, interfering creatively where they weren't needed, trying to make DC Marvel, being disrespectful to the actors and the filmmakers themselves, allowing people like Joss Whedon to abuse people on the set of Justice League. Shout out to Ray Fisher. And yeah, man, when Justice League released this day back in 2017, most people, myself included, were like, "That's it? This can't be it." There was titanium flubber face Superman. There was a unnecessary Russian family. There was slime in the form of goo. It was just a lot wrong with that movie, man. I can't believe they were satisfied with that movie and said, "Yeah, just release it in November." They should have at least delayed it. Like Justice League should not have happened at all. It's just bad decision after bad decision. You know, them wanting to still compete with Marvel without doing all the necessary work, them being disrespectful to Zack Snyder and his cast and crew, them, trying to make the movies lighthearted as opposed to allowing the films to progress like they needed to progress. And yeah, man, it was just a really messed up situation all around. And then they were lying to the fan base saying that, oh, Zach and Joss collaborated and oh, it's gonna still be mostly a Zack Snyder movie. Like, bro, had we not found out, if it weren't for if it wasn't for people that came out in support of the Zack Snyder's Justice League in the first place after Justice League release, if it wasn't for people revealing all the stuff that went on behind the scenes, including Ray Fisher, shout out to him. If it wasn't for um, Fiona Shing, for example, we would not have even known about a different cut of Justice League, and we would have just went ahead with the lies that WB and the executives told us. So it's a miracle. It's a miracle even to this day that that movie even got released. It's a miracle that that movie even saw release. And I'm thankful, and I know many others are as well, that it did see release because the differences and the quality is just plain pure night and day. But yeah, man, like I said earlier, hashtag release the Snyder cut became hashtag restore the Snyderverse. And it also spawned another hashtag sell the Snyderverse to Netflix. In my opinion, the Snyderverse should have hashtag restore the Snyderverse should have already happened. You know, a lot of people, like I said earlier, were suggesting that they release it in animated form or they continue the story in comic form. Nah, nah, nah. Because the thing is with the Snyderverse, bro, like and with DC characters, here's the thing. Like DC is licensing Sandman, the Sandman character, for those that don't know, Dream from DC, to Netflix, essentially. That show has an extremely high budget. I'm pretty sure that shit is like 150 million per episode. So when people say, "Oh, like it's too expensive, they'll never do it. It's too high." The Snyderverse is over. Like the Snyderverse can never come back because Netflix doesn't have enough money. WB doesn't have enough money. If they see there's profit to be made somewhere, they would definitely do it. Zach is already continually getting work at Netflix. Netflix paid Ryan Johnson, for example, I think like $400 million for his Knives Out movies. And like I said earlier about the Sandman, like that's another example. Like that show has an extremely high budget, man. So people saying, "Oh, it'll never happen at Netflix," like never say never. I say never say never. Like Netflix is definitely a place where I could see it continuing. The Snyderverse is popular even to this day as a whole. The Man of Steel, BVS, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is popular even to this day. People still ask about the Snyderverse all the time. Like I said, most people don't even know that Henry Cavill and everybody has been, unfortunately, put away for now in regards to what we have coming next year. And I think that if enough people brought attention to the hashtag, unfortunately, that's not necessarily happening right now because everybody has his or her own agenda when it comes to these hashtags, which is why David Ayer's Suicide Squad, I feel, also hasn't seen a release yet because it just doesn't have the same push A lot of people that say they support artistic integrity, a lot of people that say they support directors seeing their movies released aren't supporting David Ayer in the same way. And that's another topic for another video. But yeah, man, in regards to sell the Snyderverse to Netflix, it would be great to see him, of course. I'm pretty sure everybody that worked with Zach during those movies would definitely come back if the opportunity would present itself. For example, Junkie XL has worked with Zach on the Rebel Moon movies. Ray Fisher has continued to work with Zach as well. Shout out to Ray Fisher. And at any point, with DC being in the state that it is now, with Warner Brothers being in the state that it's in now, if they see a demand somewhere, and I don't know why they continue to ignore the fans, but that's also another topic for another video. If they see, but in regards to this, if they see the demand is enough and they see that the fans keep asking, they would definitely, I'm sure they would definitely give it a go. And Netflix is definitely a place that the Snyderverse could be licensed out to, I feel like. You know, thankfully, no matter what happened, no matter what is to come, starting in December with the Creature Commandos, I call it the Creature Commando verse, but that's another topic as well. No matter what is to come, Zack Snyder and the fandom scored an ultimate victory in spite of everything. In spite of everything that was levied against us, starting even with the people that like Man of Steel and BVS, there was an ultimate victory scored with the release and the reveal of Zack Snyder's Justice League. You know, and even beyond Zack Snyder's Justice League, like I said earlier, it's not just about the movie. More importantly, it's about ASFP. To those that continue to donate, whether they choose to do it publicly, I'm not necessarily one of those people, or privately. Shout out to you as well. That's a very important uh, thing as well. And I feel like people with the, like I said, with the, even with the supporting David Ayer thing being just as important, I feel like that's just as important, if not more important as well, because these movies will always be here at the end of the day. You had Ray Fisher coming out revealing what went on behind the scenes when Joss Whedon took over. That's an important thing, man. People were saying they were going to boycott DC films, and after Aquaman and Joker, DC movies did see a plummet. They did not gross as much after those two respective movies came out. So the Snyderverse was definitely profitable. Hold on, I got some numbers really quick. Let me see. And thank you all so much once again for tuning in, man. Leave a like. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Snyderverse is not over. I'm about to do some research real shit. Yeah, so uh yeah, so the Snyderverse grossed almost $5 billion from Man of Steel to Aquaman. We don't count Joker. Joker was a DC Black film. Um, and that's higher. That's high. That's even higher than Phase One of the MCU. So people say that the Snyderverse flopped, Batman v Superman flopped. They wanted $1 billion with Batman v Superman, this, that, and the third. Yeah, nah. The Snyderverse was financially successful. And regardless of what a lot of people have to say, a lot of people like Man of Steel, a lot of people like Batman v Superman, and most people would agree that Zack Snyder's Justice League is a vast, vast improvement and was a tease of more exciting things to come. So, like I said, In spite of everything that was levied against Zack Snyder, in spite of everything that was levied against the fan base, we scored an ultimate victory, thankfully, with Zack Snyder's Justice League because of November 17, 2019, because of the people that continue to support ASFP, and because of the people that didn't lose faith. We scored an ultimate victory. The movie has been out for years now. It's a great movie. Most people, want to see Zack come back and do DC films. I think a few years back, he teased like a comic Final Crisis on Vero. We don't know what all James Gunn and his universe is gonna, give us just yet. We have some ideas. We have some knowledge of what he has planned. But even James Gunn himself, as weird as he acknowledged that he too is a friend of Zack, and also a fan of Man of Steel. And he actually wrote Zack Snyder's first movie, Dawn of the Dead. So for those that are still hashtagging Restore the Snyderverse, for those that are hashtagging Sell the Snyderverse to Netflix, I say never say never. Never say never. And I hope that you all continue to support David Ayer as well in his conquest for seeing his original cut of Suicide Squad release. And not only that, but I hope that those that are supporting Zack Snyder continue to support ASFP because it's an important cause. It's a very important cause. And yeah, man, that's pretty much all I got to say for today. And the Snyderverse itself will never die. People say that the Snyderverse is dead or the Snyderverse is over. The Snyderverse isn't dead. We had those movies, but even beyond that, Zack Snyder is still directing other movies as well. And also, too, we can go back years before the DC Snyderverse even started with Watchmen, 300, Sucker Punch, etc., etc. And we can go back and enjoy those movies as well. But yeah, man, I didn't want to take up too much of you guys' time. This will be the end of the live. Leave a like, share the video, post the video to your respective social media, and subscribe if you have not already done so. Because as I always say, this is the end of the video.